Welcome to Cafe Grit. My name is Beth Anne Campbell, and I am the author of Where the Hell is My Bacon?, a book about a corporate team that triumphed over shitty leadership with the help of fried pork. I open Cafe Grit as a place where you can join me in figuring out how to channel your grit and find your voice in the world, whatever that means for you. This is the place to go when you've got the hankering for purpose, the taste for fulfillment, and you're tired of living the rat race. Thanks for stopping in. Cafe Grit is now open for service. Hey everybody, welcome to Cafe Grit. I'm your host, Beth Anne Campbell, and once again, I have my awesome friend, Mike Goggin, here today to talk. We're going to talk about early jobs today. I think this is going to be a fun episode. We touched a little bit on it on our last episode about, Mike, you talked about your carpenter job. Oh, by the way, welcome again to the show. I feel like almost like don't even need to welcome you because you're kind of like now the honorary co-host of the show. So,
which is
you
exactly
should
where I love
welcome
to
me.
be.
You should kick us off and welcome me.
Do I have to dance first? Like,
You can. Yeah.
welcome Beth Anne Campbell to the
Oh
show.
God. Oh God, that's funny. I probably should. I thought about, making up a song about the show, but I don't know. It's, I guess, one of those things on the back burner, but maybe I need to write a song about my show.
I could
I
throw a
get,
rap together. Off the cuff raps.
yeah,
My
go.
kids love
Yeah,
when I
sure.
do that.
Well,
Oh no,
yeah,
I can't do it
anytime.
right now.
Yeah,
It's too
yeah.
much
Off the
pressure.
cuff, but not right now. Yeah. Anytime, Mike. You want to build me a
Yeah,
rap
off the
song?
cuff maybe was a little aggressive of me to say, but yeah.
Speaking of rap, a really good segue because you didn't even know I was going to talk about this, but do you ever watch NPR or not watch it, but do you ever listen to NPR or
Oh, absolutely.
all the time,
Yep.
right? So I was I'll get to the rap part of this in a second, but I was listening to NPR the other day. I don't know what the show was. It was just news and it was an interview. Somebody was interviewing a Palestinian American journalist writer about the whole Israel-Palestine conflict. And I just was background music as I was driving, or background sound. And the interviewee, the journalist, the Palestinian American journalist, their voice was just annoying me a little bit. It was just like sometimes a sound or something just gets under your skin. And I was driving, I was
Most
like,
definitely,
what?
yeah.
Yeah, I was like, why is this annoying me so much? And she was talking quite at length. And then the interviewer came on, and they were both females. And she had a kind of a similar voice. And I realized what was annoying me is they were talking in like the stereotypical, remember the sweaty balls at SNL, right?
Yes, I
Where they
love that
kind of
skit.
parodied that there's that kind of quiet. They do it a lot on those classic music shows where like that was Beethoven's fifth in the key of D. And they were both talking like that, and it was annoying the shit out of me. I don't know why, but it reminded me, and then I found her on Instagram. There's an Instagram person. Her handle is I am Catherine Ellis with a K. So it's I am Catherine, KATHERINEELLIS, in case anyone wants to look her up. And I found her, and she does these parodies of NPR in the future. So she'll do like a rap. So she'll be like, that was Dance S by Big Sean featuring Nicki Minaj in the key of B flat major. Bad bitches, I'm your leader, phantom by the meter. Somebody point me to the best ass eater. And who can forget those amazing lyrics? Ass, 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 ass. And just go on. And it's just so funny. But it's
Oh.
that same like parody voice. And I had like a brief thought, like, wouldn't it be fun to do an episode all in that voice? So welcome, Mike Goggin, to the show. But then I thought, and after about a minute and a half, I would lose interest. I would be like, no, I don't think I can listen to this.
It
The
would have to be like, when you're watching Saturday Night Live and they do like the shorts, it would have to be like a shorty, three to
Yeah,
five
yeah,
minute, and that would be it. That's
yeah.
all we could stand, and I'm sure that's all anyone else can
But
stand.
it's such a classic, and a lot of times, stereotypes and parodies for sure come from reality, and there is that voice. And when I heard these two women, I was just like, oh my God, that's why it's annoying me because they're talking in the sweaty balls.
Right.
These are just great. Great. I think they're just so delicate. Just oh God. If you're an SNL fan and you have not seen the Sweaty Balls or the follow-up Muffin one with Betty White, which is another great one. I don't think it's quite as good as the Sweaty Balls, but they're so funny.
Oh, I haven't seen that one. I'll have to check that out. But
Yeah, it's the same.
speaking,
Yeah.
it's the same concept,
Yeah, same
same,
concept. Yep.
yeah. Same two.
I
Who was it?
I don't
It
remember. I
was
think so, but I don't remember. I don't remember.
okay, okay. But I was going to say, speaking of NPR, have you ever listened to the music that goes in between the news bits? So like they'll
I'm
pause
sure I have.
and
Yeah.
then there'll be this like classical type of
Yeah,
music that
sure.
plays, before the
Mhm.
next segment started. Listen to that next time and see if you can figure out what the music is. What they
Ah.
do is they take like these heavy songs like Metallica or like a Led Zeppelin. I've heard both of those. I've heard Aerosmith, and they just
Oh,
they
so they like
they're
classicalize it? Oh, that's brilliant.
yes, yeah. And
Yeah.
I'm at the first time, or the first, I guess, first time I noticed it, I'm like, hey, wait a minute, I know that tune. That sounds familiar. And then sure enough, every time I
Oh,
was
that's
just
funny.
listening to it, late last week, and I'm like, oh, cool, new song.
That plays perfectly in. Maybe this I am Catherine Ellis should pick up some of those more, heavy metal or heavy types of songs because that's probably kind of similar to what they're doing.
And she should go opposite though,
Yeah.
right? She should
Yeah.
take classical music and
Oh, there you
have
go.
some
Yeah. Oh, that would
heavy
be
bands,
yeah.
because heavy bands have done that. Like Metallica, for example,
Yeah.
I think they even did that. So
That would be awesome. Yeah. Now every time I listen to NPR and I hear that music, I'm going to be like thinking about, oh, yep, oh, that's Aerosmith or whatever it is. Yeah, that's awesome. Brilliant concept. I know that when you were saying that, I was thinking about, I do, like I'm sure I hear it. I just don't think about it because it's supposed to be
sure.
background. But then there's the all things considered little jingle dun 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 dun. So they had it, I don't know, it's probably like 6 or 7 years ago. They had people write in and make lyrics up. So that was another kind of a fun thing. NPR is just so cool. So many fun things and then so many for a media that has so many cool things that I love. They also have so many things that I can't stand like those classical like if I turn it on like one of our stations here and I can pull in like 3 or 4 NPR public radio stations in this area from various sources and sometimes like 2 or 3 of them they're just playing classical music. That's it, like on a Sunday or something. And then the other one maybe I can get they'll have like The Moth or Snap Judgment, shows that I love, but some of them are I don't know, it's probably funding, right?
I would imagine so. And they're
Like
all
why they would
publicly funded, right? Kind of.
we don't have enough money this month, so we're just going to play Beethoven and Brahms for you all Sunday long. So,
We had to furlough the host, so
right.
here's music.
Oh God, we probably have had to do that. But well, so today we're not going to talk about NPR all day, although clearly we could. We're going to talk about some of our early jobs. And I'm pretty excited about this. I just jotted down a few things because I was like, man, what are like I can remember a few of my early jobs, but what were some of the other ones that maybe I've forgotten about? So I think this is going to be fun. Maybe figure out what we can glean from those jobs as we enter into our glory years and start looking for fulfillment and maybe maybe just get some insight from our early days. People always ask the question, like, what did you want to do? Well, I'm going to ask you, Mike, when you were young, before you had a real job, what did you want to do?
I wanted to be an archaeologist, actually.
Dude, same.
Yeah. In like junior high, I mean, I was jonesing all over that. And
Yeah,
to
and
this
you
day,
were
I'm still
Indiana Jones and all over it, probably, because that's what I was doing. I
right.
watched Raiders of the Lost Ark, and I thought, that's what I want to do. That is what I want to do. But you didn't end up being an archaeologist. What happened?
I was smarter than the system. That's kind of the what happened. I mean, you know my story. I didn't go to college because I
Yeah,
felt that it just wasn't.
yeah,
I was smarter than that, and
it's
or whatever.
overrated.
Overrated, and I wasn't sure where it's going to get me, so I just felt going a different route
You
made
had that
sense. So
insight even back then because there's a lot of that coming back up now. Now, I did go to college and but I really was an opportunist. So I took advantage of the tech bubble, even though I don't really like working in tech, or at least what the roles that I ended up having in tech. Um, but there's a whole kind of a movement and a push now, especially I think since the pandemic, since so many people came out of college and universities with these huge debts, at least here in the States, and
yeah,
then couldn't get jobs. So, and I do think it's overrated because um unless you're in a field where you really need like a doctor, right? You can't not go to school and learn,
right, right.
but for so many things, um but for me, architecture, or not architecture, archaeology, I realized before I spent a lot of money on anything that archaeologists just basically sit in the sun with toothbrushes and uncover dinosaur bones with little paintbrushes. And I thought, I was kind of looking for like the ball rolling down the tunnel, and the you give me the whip, I give you the idol, but realized
Don't
that
step on the
that
eyeballs type
really
stuff.
was not what it was all about. So I
Yeah. I think it was because I enjoyed history so much and still do. I love history.
yeah.
There's always that history component. Even when we went to Europe over the summer, it was, yeah, there was some culture that I wanted to see for sure and experience, but for me, it was all about the history that I was going to be able to take
Yeah,
in all those countries.
fascinating.
And that's what I did. I loved it. Everything I looked at was from that point of view of, you know, when was it built? Is it still the same building today as it was when it was built? How old is it? And, what happened here? And um, in Europe is just the entire EU is just the most fascinating place I've ever been to in my life
Oh,
with when it comes to that kind of historic footprint. I'm reading on another book right now, and I won't get into that, but that the author kind of said the same thing. Um, he's basically a singer for a band that I love, Rush. And when they toured Europe, I mean, he kind of had that same kind of fascination. He kind of looked back at North America and said, North America is just, it's not done yet. With,
yeah.
the
Oh,
building and stuff like that. And then also how we are we so easily tear things down,
mm-hmm.
right? To put up something brand new, which
Yeah.
is, not necessarily, what's been done over time. So yeah, archaeology I was just all over it. And sitting with a toothbrush uncovering dinosaurs would have been cool with me.
I would see now I would do it. Now I'm like, that really kind of would be or thing I didn't really want to at the time, but in my later years, I think being like a forensic psychologist or a forensic investigator, like a CSI where you're looking at,
Yeah,
evidence and stuff, I think would be really cool. But the other
very
thing I
cool.
wanted to do when I was a kid was be an entertainer. Like I wanted to be, like a singer, and I still, if I go, I could be like at a mall and you would have like one of those cheesy, which there aren't even hardly any malls around anymore, but some of us can remember the day, and they would have like these cheesy fashion shows or some stupid,
Oh,
you know,
sure.
elementary school. I still, or if I even like I watch my nieces and nephews when they were in dance class and they were doing their recitals, I get choked up. Like any production, I must have been in a former life like a stage person because it scares the shit out of me. And I haven't done a lot of stage. I did some in high school, that was it. But I just get really choked up. Like I get this very deep emotional reaction when I see any kind of performance. I don't care if it's a
Hmm.
comedian or if it's a play or a musical or a fashion show at the mall. I get really choked up seeing people on stage, and it's just weird because I never did pursue it. But hey, maybe it's never too.
Clearly you have some kind of attachment to
Hmm.
it. So whether that's this lifetime or another lifetime, regardless.
Yeah, yeah.
So yeah.
Who knows? Never too late. So we did talk in our one of our previous episodes about in the context of chronic stress, and you had talked about one of your early jobs in carpentry. Was that your
Mhm.
like first? Tell me what was your like your first real job? Like as a kid, did you do like I don't know, be a caddy, or like my brothers were caddies or delivered papers or anything? Did you do anything like that when you were a kid?
Yeah, I spent a couple of years in high school, summers and work program and stuff like that, detailing cars.
Oh, no
So
kidding.
yeah. So back in the mid
Oh,
in
so many
90s,
questions.
95 to what, 98? No, I'm sorry, 85, 80s rather, 85 to like 88 or something like that. Um, yeah, I detailed a lot of cars and worked for several different detail shops. And I mean, I was a kind of thought myself as a car person, but as I look back at it now, I wasn't really a car person. I wasn't completely devoted. I was going to spend all my money and all my time on a car, which means I just liked cars and
Yeah.
detailing. I got into it and then was able to ride it out for a couple of years before I rolled into, carpentry. So
What was the grossest thing that you ever would you ever have like to detail a car that was just nasty? I just love asking questions like that.
no, not really. And
Oh,
no horror stories or anything like that. So thank goodness. And I never even thought about it. I never even thought about it at all until you just said that. I'm like, huh, I never really had that, that limo that came in that was
yeah.
carrying the rock stars and, there's urine and crap and puke all over the bed.
You
I'd never
know,
had any of that.
and you wouldn't because we didn't have internet back then, but I watch a lot of videos. You watch one and then you get a lot in your feed of people who clean out really, really and it makes me feel better to see those really nasty cars because my husband and I have Sean and I have argued about this a little bit in the past because he would say, let's go get your car detailed because he does that with his car periodically. Like he'll take it
Yeah.
in and get it detailed. And this is when we had our two previous dogs. And I was just like, no, I'm embarrassed. I'll have to clean it first. But then you watch
Yeah.
these videos and you realize not even, don't even worry about it. If you're out there and you're thinking, I've got to clean my car before I take it to get it detailed, go get it detailed. I trust me, you will not be as gross and nasty as some of these vehicles that I've seen on TikTok.
You
It's
just jarred a memory loose that I haven't thought
mm,
about in a very long time.
yes.
I do actually have one story
Do tell.
that grossed me out. So we did a lot of detailing for a car dealership. So they would take cars in on trade and they would send them to us and we would clean them up and put them back on their lot. This one car came in that had like that, it was like a light interior, like a creamish or a whitish interior.
Oh,
And I think it was even like pleather, pleathery material on the seats. And the person that owned it was apparently a smoker. And I can't imagine one person can do this to the car, but the inside of the car was all tar
oh,
stained. Every inch of the
uh-uh.
inside of that car
Uh-uh.
was tar stained. And cleaning that thing was unbelievable. I mean, we didn't even really know that that wasn't the color of those seats until we started to clean it and said, "Oh, holy shit. This is actually a different color." And
Mm.
so that one was, wow, that one took a lot of work. And,
Did it
I'm not,
smell?
it did.
Oh.
And, back then my parents were chain smokers, so it didn't really bother me. But now it would really bother me. I don't know, for some reason, I've just grown this
Same.
intolerance to
I used
cigarette
to be a
smoke.
smoker and it grosses me out now. If I'm walking in the street and this is just like so horrible and judgmental, but one of my neighbors is a smoker. He comes out very early. He's the one that with the little dachshund and the
Watson, yeah.
guy. Really nice people. They're always very polite and wavy and stuff. But he smokes, and every time I smell it, I just as I'm walking, I'm like, oh God, it's very weird because and I smoked for 12 years, but um I think that, I ask this question of you because every time I have a repair person or some new service industry interaction with somebody, I always ask, what is the craziest, grossest, weirdest thing that you've experienced? Because people have really good stories. Like I had a coworker whose husband was a paramedic, and so, or what do you call it, EMT. And so she had, she would tell us these really, crazy stories about, people that were like, weighed like 800 pounds and had maggots in their flesh and
Yeah.
stuff. So,
Oy, oy,
I mean,
oy.
you got to be careful what you ask, but if somebody comes to do the plumbing and it's a new person, like I'll be like, hey, what's the, the like most extreme or craziest or like a maintenance person for when we were renting, I would always say like, what's the weird, and it would always tell like a hoarder. And so it's a good question to ask for people if you're just curious about the extremes of what people have done in their careers. But anyway,
I actually have a grocery store from when I was in the carpentry
yeah,
trades.
we'll tell that we'll just make this whole show about gross stories because I'm sure I have a bunch of them too. No, yeah, I love it.
So before I actually was able to swing a hammer on a crew, you had to pay some dues.
Yeah.
So I was the laborer. Me and my buddy were the laborers. So what that really means is we'll go to the job sites, clean up the outside of the job sites, and then we'll go in the house and between the trades. So you've got electricians and plumbers and HVAC, and you've got insulators, drywallers, tapers, and then the countertop folk and the finishing touches, the trim and stuff like that. So each time we really had to go into the house, the structure, and we had to clean it all up for the next trade so they can come in and they got a clean space to work with. Um, I don't know if it's still the case, but I'll throw it out there because it was the case in the late 80s. Drywallers were by far the grossest human beings in all the
Really?
trades. And they would leave their signatures usually in the basements or the crawl space of a bucket filled with shit.
Their own shit?
Their own. Yes.
Why? So I'm just curious, what is your theory as to why someone who would not just use a bathroom or a porta potty or some other, the bushes even, versus a bucket in a crawl space? You
Don't
got to go,
really
you
know
got to
what
go
their I really don't know
and
what their
leave it
motivations were and then leave it. I think it was more about just
initiating you.
leaving something behind for the laborers to kind of pick up and
Wow.
yeah, and it stank up the house and it was
Oh,
just yeah, it was just nasty.
I could tolerate a lot of things, but that would make me dry heave. That would be.
Yeah, and everybody, all the other trades, they knew it, right? And it's not like it was one person or one crew. I mean, we went through a lot of them, and so it was just that particular trade that was notorious for doing something like that.
Oh,
In general, carpentry and every when you get build your house, there's stuff in the walls and it's not like gross stuff, but I mean there's like shit and crap all over your place. I had to replace my hot water heater, which in Arizona they're in your garage. So that's on this platform. So it's kind of up off the floor by about 3 feet. So it had leaked, and overall engineering design, I thought it was horrible. It's like a hot water heater, a water heater on a drywall platform because it has to be fireproof or fire
yeah,
retardant. The garage does, and that's why they drywall the house, at least the house side of your garage.
yeah.
So I had to pull that apart and rebuild it. I pulled it apart. I found about 8 beer bottles in there.
Inside,
Yes.
how do you even get 8 beer bottles inside your water heater?
No, not your water heater. It was inside. So the water
Oh,
heater
inside
sat
the
on this
wall?
platform. Yeah, the
Oh, in the
platform.
platform.
So it was on
Okay.
the platform.
Phew.
Yeah. So
I was like,
yeah, not the hot water
like when
heater.
people have find dead bodies inside of like water containers. Like, how did you get? Oh, okay, but still, oh,
And that kind of stuff happens all the time. It's just kind of a crew leaves something behind that to remember them by,
it's a risk when you open up anything in an older house. Like you seriously don't know what you're gonna find. Like I've never been
pretty
up
much.
in my attic. We have an attic and all of our ductwork for our air conditioning is up there. It's, I believe, from what I've heard and what I can surmise, it's probably just very clean and neat and it's got the ducts and it's got the air conditioning unit up there. But I don't go up there because I don't know. I don't want to see what I don't want to know about stuff that might be up there that I don't want to see. I mean, I
It
get,
reminds me. It reminds me of a commercial, and I forget it's some kind of home buying commercial where an agent's walking a family through a home, and they go up to the attic, and in the attic people must still live there, so there's still stuff in there, but there's these mannequins that are posed and sitting around this table.
Mm.
And the prospective buyer goes, no way.
Yeah. You don't want to
That's
find
creepy.
dolls or mannequins in your
Right,
some
right.
mannequins would probably turn me off too. So you were in detailing when you were kind of, I assume like a teenager kind of. And
Yeah,
so how did you end up going from what was the evolution how did you get into the carpentry stuff?
I'm fortunate. My one of my friends' dads was a higher up at a construction company. And back then in Northern Illinois, the housing market was booming, and there was tons of land, so there was tons of development. And started off with just a summer job. We had gotten out of school, and he said, "Hey, we're looking for another laborer." And I said, "Yeah, I'd love it." Um, so that's how it started, and it
And you
just
did
kind
that for
of
how many
went from
years?
there. Probably for just like one
One, yeah.
uh, at tops. I think it was just 1 year.
I mean, it sounds like you learned a lot. And I know my younger brother in high school started working for a teacher who had a side construction business. And he did that for a few years. And I mean, I think really mostly from that, but gained so much skill. I mean, he ended up like building his own house
Yeah.
just from the experience. So I imagine that you probably learned a ton. How long did you have to be the laborer who cleans out the shit bucket before you got to be
For,
somebody who actually swung a hammer?
for that year, yeah, that whole year,
Oh,
that's what we
wow.
did. Is we swept houses, cleaned up construction sites, um and even swept streets that weren't quite open city streets yet. So we
Yeah.
had to kind of clean them up when they did excavations. And oh yeah, there was so much stuff that I did on that gig, and just whether I think it I was at the point in my life where I was always curious and always wanting to learn and needing to learn. I don't know if I like really comprehended that back then,
Yeah.
but I was just taking it all in,
Yeah.
right? The
It's the
excavation
irony.
process, how far down you have to go, right? Strawing, making sure that during the winter time we would lay straw down after they poured the foundation so the footings wouldn't freeze, and just the pipes, the plumbing, the electrical, and from that I did pretty much everything there is to do if you were to build your own house, right?
Yeah.
Everything from I wouldn't do the concrete though, so let me take that back. That's something I never really took on. So like pouring the foundations or
Yeah.
and stuff like that. But I've done everything that involves wood shingles,
Did you do
the whole
demo
bit.
day? Did you
So
get to do any demo days where you?
oh yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, I did. Like I was working nights. My dad worked for a construction company that did commercial work, so they would go into the malls and they would demo stores. So
Oh,
yeah, you can imagine the amount of frustration you can take out in that.
I'm sure. Well, every time I see it, because I'm a big HGTV fan, so I watch a lot of those shows, and the guys always get really excited about and I think the sometimes the women who are usually the designers or the contractors or whatever, they do too, but it's more like, okay, now we're going to get everything cleaned out. But the guys come in there and they're like, yes, demo day. Like it looks like they're having fun. And I mean, I don't know that I would think that that's fun, but like you said, you could probably take out some really good frustration.
Yeah, yeah. There were all sorts of good sides to that. The worst side of it was just working in the elements,
Yeah.
whether they're the heat and humidity of the summer,
Yeah.
July-ish, August timeframe, or the you know 50, 60 below zero, in the winter, right? So I mean, houses needed to be built, so we just kind of did what we had to do.
It was kind of the same. I mentioned in our previous episode when I worked for well, 2 summers really, but the first summer was the best one when I worked on the grounds crew at University
Yeah.
of Michigan. All woman crew, woman crew leader who was just super chill, like, into crystals and, would give us like psychic readings on the side. But it was, shit weather. I mean, shit weather that I complain about all the time. It was in the summer, so it would be just god awful hot, humidity. The
Right.
cicada sound is just like every time I hear it, it reminds me of that. And of course, we had to wear steel toe boots and jeans and long sleeves sometimes, depending on what we were doing. But I would do it again in a heartbeat, I think. I don't know if I would have the energy to, with all the labor work, but I never thought about it at the time. It was only kind of like an afterthought, like, oh yeah, that was just like really gritty work. But at the time, I just thought it was like the best job in the world. I loved the
Yeah.
camaraderie. I loved just being out. We went to all different buildings. I got to see inside a lot of the buildings that I never would have. And I had been a student there for a year and a half, and it was just good getting your hands in the dirt. I think we talked about that in the creativity, like just sometimes just doing something with your hands just
Yeah.
feels good. It just feels good. It's something inherent, I think, as humans, maybe as other animals too, but it was good to get in the dirt.
Yeah. And it doesn't involve sitting in your ass all day
Right.
like we do now.
Exactly. Sometimes it did. Sometimes we would be sitting out the whole day, just weeding, just like but I learned so much about gardening and about landscaping, although we didn't do, like typical landscaping like you might do in your house. The tools, like I didn't know that there was, tools for for weeding dandelions and, different tools for that would, do this and how you might prep the ground for planting flowers and then the different types of plants that they would put around that would a lot of them because of the colors of the blue and the gold, but then there would be like red, white, and blue for holidays and just I don't know, you suck it up too at that age too, like just you remember everything, right? You probably it's just probably like you in with detailing or with construction, you're so young that just suck up all that information and it just
Yeah.
really
Yep.
sticks with you for a long, long time.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. I still use it to this day.
Yeah,
All of it. Yeah.
yeah,
Even the detailing crap when I'm cleaning my own cars or whatever. I remember that.
yeah.
Buffing, waxing.
Did they
So
have like the really cool tools like they have now, like the I know you can get like I've seen them do this in some of these shows where you have like this, it's like goop, it's almost like a slimy Play-Doh, but it gets in all the crevices and gets all the crumbs out, which is a godsend for me because I have a lot of crumbs everywhere.
no, we didn't have a goop tool,
Yeah,
but yes, there were all sorts of very cool
yeah,
tools, especially for cleaning the interiors, the more industrial like seat steamers,
yeah,
interior seat steamers. Well, they're not called that. They're called something different, but
yeah,
upholstery
yeah,
cleaners. But yeah,
yeah.
yeah, we had some pretty good ones that really actually deep cleaned, someone's interior. Yeah.
So you did the detailing evolved into the carpentry. So why did you not stay with you had said you loved it. Why didn't you stay with the carpentry?
Like I said, there was a housing boom, and then when I actually was building houses and getting a bunch of side work and things were going very well, then the subdivision, we were building a subdivision, the subdivision started to slow down,
Uh
and I got laid off for a couple of months in the winter. And that's when I said, and I mean, where I grew up and where I came from, my friends' dads were carpenters. I had, family members that were carpenters, specifically my grandfather. And, I kind of saw that could happen and does happen.
yeah,
And I just really didn't want to adapt to, that, in my life. It just, I don't know. I guess if you really look at it, maybe I didn't like it as much as I thought I did. And I was looking for something different. But that's when I just said I needed to find a different, career path.
yeah.
And when I worked so hard to get into the utility.
I mean, did you I'm not going to say regret because I don't know that people like us really regret things like that, but I mean, did you miss it after you got out of it and now you're working for utility, which I know what that's like. So, believe me, there were times in my head where I thought, why didn't I major in German like I was originally going to do? Why did I do this? But did you miss it?
Not at first, not
Yeah,
at first. For a long time, actually, I didn't miss it. And I think that, back to our chronic stress discussion, I didn't have chronic stress when I first started the utility. It was
same.
all new and I was very ambitious. there was so much to learn and do, that I didn't really even think about it. It wasn't until like years and years where you got into those larger roles and more responsibility, and then you had the more stress, right? I
Do you
think,
think that's it? Do you think it's like getting, is it the responsibility or is it the accumulation over time or all of it?
oh, it's definitely the accumulation of stuff over time.
Yeah.
Um, but it definitely gets the most burden when you have the most responsibility. And that could even be carrying a pager, right? Even you're in IT, you're not, working, the storms or anything like that. There was a time in my career when I had to carry a pager 24 by 7 by
That is a great,
365. And that's when it started to suck because none of your time was your own, right?
you are, that's
Even the
such a great
weekends.
point. That is such a great point. Because similar to you, I loved like the first 10 years. I was like, my husband even, his company shut down and I remember him asking me at least once, probably a couple times, do you want to, should I look outside of Michigan? And I was like, no, I am never, I love this job. I loved the recognition. I loved that I felt like I was finally being challenged in a good way. And it just, was sucking it up. And you're absolutely right. It was really for me when I got into management, but a little bit before that, well, no, because I think it was probably around that same time that I started being in a on-call schedule. So now you're, like you said, you're sort of you're tied. You've got the ball and chain of the pager at the time.
Right.
And
Right.
that there's nothing like getting awakened at 3 o'clock in the morning for a major critical incident that now you've got to be at your best and come on and try to help lead and figure out and troubleshoot and maybe help other people troubleshoot for the next, maybe sometimes 3 or 4 days to even on some things. There's nothing like that to really put a damper on your satisfaction at work. There's nothing
Right. And remote technology really wasn't very good back then. So
right.
it's not like you would get a page and then you would remote in. You usually had to go in.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, it was there were a couple of years there before that happened where, yep, you're exactly right. But even remoting in, I mean, just that being jolted out of the and then it's like whenever you're carrying that pager, even if you don't get called, you're always anticipating, is it going to go off? And so there's, for me, it was like, I would have like a week, like maybe 1 week a month or something where I was carrying the pager. And it started before that, just talking about early career. Now that I'm talking through it, I did actually, was in an on-call rotation much earlier. And I remember I was probably only about two or maybe 2 months into my first real job after I graduated at the utility that I worked at, that you eventually worked at, contracted with, and as one of our vendors. I remember they gave me the pager, they gave me this book. I got like 2 hours of, here you go. We're gonna, kind of show you what's in the binder. And usually when you get called, it's something. And of course, the first week I'm on call, I get called in the middle of the night. Whatever it is not in the binder. So I had to
Of
call my
course.
mentor and woke him up. So he said, that's not our problem. They shouldn't have called you. Call this person, this team. So I called this team per the list in the book, not realizing that there was an on-call schedule. So the person that I called was the lead who was not on call, and there was some other list somewhere that I didn't have. So like 4 people got called. And then of course there was an email the next day that wasn't directed at me. It was really directed at the call center. Like, why did you unnecessarily, it was a very routine thing that you called the wrong team. So 4 people got unnecessarily called, but I was, a young whippersnapper really trying to make it. And it just really set a bad tone for on call from that point on. And fortunately, I never had any, at least in my young days, didn't have any more complex things like that. But certainly in the later days, especially when I got to be a manager and I was expected, now you're expected to be on the call. And in fact, in my later days, had an on-call rotation for storm manager where I didn't even get paid for it. I was expected to carry the pager for a week, like a week out of the month. but didn't get any on-call pay, which is typical in our industry. You would get some sort of overtime for or some sort of payment. So yeah, I didn't even think
You
about
got
that.
payment for that? Because that was one of my biggest gripes. I never did.
Mm.
Yeah,
Yeah, when I
no, they
was
never had. I even, didn't quite understand it because, you're like carrying this thing and they're, well, you're not at work. It's like, yeah, but am I not at work? I really
oh,
had a hard
totally.
time with it.
Oh, that
Yeah,
is the lie that they tell you. So when I was an individual contributor on call, I got paid for it. So we would get paid 1 hour a day and then 2 hours on the weekend of just regular time, or maybe it was time and a half. But regardless, like that's what you get paid. So there was a little bit of a payoff, a literal payoff. Like I would get a bump in my paycheck because I would have like 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 hours of pay just for carrying the pager. And then if you got a call, like the first hour, like let's say I call on a Wednesday, I automatically get paid for an hour. But if I spent time beyond that hour on a call, like at midnight or whatever, then I would get additional time. I think that was just regular time.
right.
But when I was a manager, they decided that they wanted one point of contact for all IT issues. So the leads in our EAM portfolio, our enterprise asset management portfolio, were on a rotation and they didn't pay. They changed that after I left, but there was a couple of years where just like you, I carried a pager for a week and I argued the same thing. I said, because what they would say is, well, if there's no storm, then you don't get a call, right? And I would say, well, that's true of any on-call issue, right? And you pay these other people to be on call, but because
Right.
I'm a manager, you're not paying me. And I still have to keep myself fit for duty. I can't go out and go to a party. I can't go out of town. Um, so that was probably that was one factor that kind of sort of pushed me towards wanting to get out. There were other factors too, but that was one of the later things that was like, you know what? It's already horrible here. And I'm unhappy and I've been thinking about leaving and now you're making me be in a storm manager role and you're not paying me. And these fucking business managers would use us as like I remember once I got a call. It was an emergency call because a test system that they were using to test in was down. And I'm like, you can't use me. I'm a storm manager. You can't, just, but that's what they would do sometimes and that would just kind of took me over the edge. But anyway, um, yeah,
I will
guys.
say though that not all my on-call past I didn't enjoy that much because when I first started the utility, prior to really their digital transformation and me moving into more of that, more app and IT centric world, we were on, as the drafting department, we were on call for storms because we would be used in many capacities. We would be bird dogs. So when we had foreign crews come in, we would take them around the service territory based on the outage tickets because we had the maps. We knew how to read them, and we can take the trouble crews out. Um, then we had the dispatch cage, which was my favorite because back
Yeah.
then, prior to more modern OMS systems, the dispatch system was really just kind of a mainframe green screen tabular. It didn't do predictions of any kind. It was just really recording kind of crap.
Yeah.
So we had all of our, basically circuit maps underneath, clear plastic, and we would all use grease pens. And we would, make sure trace the circuits and mark on the with grease pen on the map where the issues were and where the protective devices were, and critical customers, and then the dispatcher would then take that and then work with the crews outside. That was by far my favorite. um so I mean, and I actually loved those days because it was that heat of the moment, lots of stuff to do, wanted to contribute, wanted to help, and it was all new,
Yeah.
and it was cool. But like one role I didn't like was callbacks, when they'd put us on a phone and call a customer to ask them if they had power on. Yeah, believe it or not, they did that back then because they didn't know.
I don't think that a lot of people that, out of my 12 listeners who might be listening who've not had experience at a utility or with some other industry where there is an outage management system, when you really have not stopped to think about all of the complex things that you have to deal with when you have a major event. I mean, and it's not just utilities, but certainly utilities because you have an infrastructure that is, directly impacting your customer base and it has to be taken care of. And sometimes things can be pretty catastrophic. So it really is pretty fascinating. So when you say, manually, where you didn't even have a system that could, because nowadays you have these really robust the software that really can analyze and there's everything's smart nowadays. So it's I'm not going to say it's easier, but it's probably a lot easier at least to identify where you're going. But
Right.
back in the day, you were relying on somebody's calling you and saying, I don't have power. And you don't have a system that says, oh, we've got 100 people that called in this area. I can tie it back to this one transformer. You don't have that. You've got to do that all in your head. And it's mind-boggling that's what used to be. And it's fascinating the way it happens now, but it's even more fascinating to me that anybody ever got their power back on. That's probably why out in the country we
Yeah.
we would be out without power for a week at a time, pretty regularly. Oh man, it's so exciting. I mean, I don't know. I just love talking about this stuff. It's we talked last time about our parallel lives because it's kind of the same. I started off as a coder, so I took an opportunity. I was a temp. One of my early jobs was as a temporary. I'll call myself the admin to the admins at this utility where I worked for 17 years. And I was in the IT department. So I was not doing any IT. I was going to junior college, just getting the basics out of the way. I had been a nanny, one of my other earlier jobs, for 6 years, out in New Jersey, just outside of New York City. That's a whole other episode because, man, I'll tell you what, being in your 20s and living a half an hour from New York City was just oh, amazing. But I came back home to Michigan and started working for this utility because my stepdad worked in the IT department at this utility, and he was aware of a position. So I was basically just monitoring a phone, but I just fell in love with the people in technology because people in technology tend to be, and it's just the word according to Beth, but they're all types, but everybody's just really science minded and technology minded. And I really just love that being a person who I have a whole evolution of my life as far as religion and, what traditional role do I want to take on or not? And technology was just sort of like everybody was, you could have super religious people, but you could have people that, were, atheists, and you could have people that, their wives were stay-at-home moms, but then you'd have a lot of women in the technology in roles and just really it was the boom of the very late 90s and early 2000s. And so I ended up going to school and getting my degree in computer information systems, starting off as a coder, which I did not like at all. To your point of, you know, was it really a meaningful? I knew I was going to make money at it. So that's really, I didn't know what else I was going to do. I'd already financially failed out of U of M, where I thought I might major in German, but just took a temporary role. And again, that early being in my then late 20s, and just sucking up all of this information and learning but just really loving the people. And that's why I ended up just going into that. It was the opportunity, and I knew I would get a job, and I loved the people, and I ended up back at that utility, but didn't stay in the really truly technical role. I mean, my role was technical for many, many years, but not like the coder technical, like programmer
Right, right, right.
technical. But and it was amazing how things changed over the years. I'll tell you what. But man, I would
I'd
go
say that
back.
you wouldn't go back,
I would. No, I
would you
would
say?
totally. We've talked about the big project at this utility that I worked at. the 3-letter project that was like 3 years long, where my mom died and I
Right.
started wearing a mouth guard, and I would do it again in a heartbeat because it was like a mission. When they talk about the work family, I mean, there were times where I wanted to jump across the table and strangle people. I said things on phone calls that would get me fired today, but it's just a different thing when you have everybody on board and committed to the mission. It just felt like that for me.
Yeah, I do like that. It keeps your mind. You have a team, a family. You're all in the same, heading in the same direction, rowing in the same direction, and yeah,
Before the
that could be
stresses hit,
very,
yeah. Before the chronic
yeah,
stresses kicked in, yeah.
right,
But I wouldn't go back
right.
to doing like coding. I didn't like being a coder.
You know, the one thing you had mentioned, and before I forget about it, that I wanted to say, my experience with when I joined the utility was similar with people, right? I grew up in a small northwest town in northern Illinois. I
Mhm.
don't say it's not even a suburb of Chicago. It was like 65 miles northwest on the Wisconsin border. Um, when I went to ComEd, where I started my career, I was introduced for the first time in my life to diversity
Yeah,
of all flavors. You name it, it was there. I had never seen that before. And it
yeah,
was so awesome because, my small town, mentalities were just completely shattered in terms of, what I thought I knew, who I thought I knew.
yeah,
Um, and then I went there and it was just awesome. And that's probably I mean, there's so many things I took away from working at the electric company, but that one was, for me, probably the richest experience of my life from start all the way to the day I, left.
yeah.
That was awesome.
Yeah, I concur. I mean, I grew up probably very similar. I lived out in the country. I was K through 12 in the same school. We did not have a single person of color in the entire time. I think maybe once,
Yes.
like for a few months, somebody who was Mexican American, but just very sheltered farmer, middle class or poor, very homogeneously white, and ended up in an industry that I will say a lot of things about my experience at the utility that I worked at and in the consulting firm, and certainly in the management, the upper management and executive, it was fairly homogenous. But I will say about when you're in a tech team right from the get-go, even before I was had a real job in tech when I was temping, a lot of women, a lot of people of color, diversity of religion, non-religion, which is, I never even like, aren't you so, isn't everybody religious, right?
Right, right.
And that was another one of the things that appealed to me. Just everybody was just like, nobody cared. I'm here to just, that stuff didn't matter. No, you could walk by somebody's desk and they would be like crosses and Jesus everywhere. And you walk by somebody else's desk and it's heavy metal, and another person who's like, I'm just into roller coasters, and nobody cared because everybody was kind of it was just exciting and technology was really booming, and I don't know, it was just different. I really feel grateful that I was lucky, because it was just pure luck that I ended up in that area, or in that world at that time, because it really did kind of paved the way. As much as I complain about leadership, that had nothing to do, the tech part of it, and as well as at the consulting firm, there was just a lot of diversity. It's so nice as a woman to go into a meeting, and sometimes it's all women, because that just doesn't happen. When I would be meeting with the upper managers or executives, it was a lot of middle-aged white men, and then me, and maybe if a couple of other younger people. But it's just the way it is, we've gotten better as a society, but it still is fairly homogenous at the top in a lot of places. And but at that level, at the bottom of the pyramid, I feel like tech is one of the most diverse arenas in corporate. So It was
Yeah,
very
no,
cool.
I would agree with that. I found engineering was too, electrical engineering. That was pretty
Mhm.
diverse as well.
Did you ever find like there's always like this mythical engineers versus techies conflict. And I did run into it a little bit. Like I didn't even it wasn't even something that I was aware of and then somebody mentioned it. It was actually during this big project that I refer to. And there were a lot of engineers and I did notice a little bit with some people a little bit of like if you're an engineer, you're just a little bit above the technology people. So I think I probably already had a chip on my shoulder about that and maybe fought against that because most of the business side of our world was engineers and then of course I worked with the technology people. But I don't know if you ever noticed that or had that kind of legendary engineers over or if you're an engineer,
I,
you're somehow a little bit better than the technology people.
yeah, oh, without a doubt. But it was, I think it was easy for me to paint with a broad brush, right?
Yeah.
To
Oh
say
yeah.
that all engineers, but the reality is it's not all engineers. I
No,
mean,
and I didn't notice it until someone mentioned it, and then I was like, but then I thought, well, is it just because I now somebody has planted the seed that now I think this person is behaving a little bit more snooty? But and I'm sure that there were snooty technology people too. So, but it was just kind of funny.
most definitely.
Awesome. Well, this was really interesting because I honestly when we started when we talked about talking about our early careers, I really thought we would end up being more focused on the really early stuff, which is fascinating, but I'm actually pleased and delighted that we kind of went into our kind of early, permanent career,
Corporate.
the choice,
Yeah,
yeah, corporate
yeah,
careers,
yeah.
because I wasn't even thinking about that, but there's just so much in the nuances of especially when we didn't even really touch upon this in much in the chronic stress episode, but just how for whatever reason, whether it's accumulation or you get more responsibilities, for me, management, but just those early years and how I just loved it so much. And I never felt, even though I was working, sometimes 70 hours a week and had the pager, I can say that I didn't like, being awakened in the middle of the night, but I also would have said at the time, I'm not leaving my job. I love it. So it's just weird
Yeah.
how that evolves. I don't know what the
I
message
think
is. Don't make people managers and don't give them more responsibility. I know that's that doesn't work, but
no, I'm not sure that's it.
mm,
You know, my first corporate job, at the utility, I definitely found myself in what I was, my drive, right, as in grit, right, to take it back to the whole premise of these podcasts.
yeah,
I was hungry for knowledge. I was hungry to do things, especially in the tech space, right? The coding, back then, that's when, the internet first came about, and you
mhm,
had, the HTML programming and coding. I wanted nothing more than to generate HTML and stuff like that. And when I got more into that IT space earlier on, um, I had an hour and a half one-way train ride from my house to our downtown Chicago offices.
oh,
And I know your face, and a lot of times I felt that way as well. However, it was an hour and a half of solid learning.
yeah,
I had my laptop, I had my course books. And back then, I mean, tech books were ridiculously expensive. I mean,
yeah,
85, $100
mhm,
for, a text. But I just was consuming it and eating it
yeah,
up. And I found that, um, you know, that pace, I think, throughout my entire career that I still practice today.
yeah,
You always, it's just the curiosity,
yeah,
and then you have to be willing to work on it. Your knowledge, I think we talked about that in the last episode as well. Is you have, we call it a brand, and maybe that brand's not the right word, but if you're making yourself better, you're making your role better at work, and then you're making your team better, your results better, and stuff like that. And I think that's where, really I found that out, that if I wanted to do something, nobody was going to give it to me.
yeah,
There was no way in hell. I was a dude in an engineering focused corporation, which in those days, and to some extent these days, if you don't have a degree,
Yeah.
you don't have a chance.
Yeah.
And you will get to a certain space and spot, and then you're done. So I had to figure out how to overcome that hurdle, and that was to prove myself.
Yeah.
And that just led into, this regimen of me always consuming, always learning, always being curious. And then, I kind of accredit that to where I've been able to make my way throughout my career to where I sit here today, because I still am very curious. I'm not, the 54-year-old tech guy that is good with the way things are. I'm not. I'm unsettled like that. I just don't believe it.
It's
Right.
really, really interesting because there is such a big myth about when people reach their glory years, right? Their middle ages, that somehow, and I've seen this in the perception of people. I think it happens for women earlier, but it happens for everybody. You get to a certain age and you sort of feel like, and there's this myth that we stop learning, right? When you're young, you suck everything up. You and I have even said it probably 5 times in this conversation about sucking up that. But the truth is that you don't stop learning if you're still interested. My direction of learning just wavered from where I was at career wise because I didn't like. I learned to love managing people. I didn't like project management, at least not at the company that I was with. So I would never go, like I would hear some of my GIS colleagues especially would go home and they would do really cool things just on their off hours. And I never once thought, oh, I'm gonna go home and learn more and get my PMP and strive for project management because I didn't like it. But there are other things now that that I've loved before and now love more because I have time to do them, so that this idea that somehow you reach a certain age and you can't learn or can't learn as fast or you don't learn is just bullshit because
Agreed.
I think of all the software I've learned in creating graphics and writing and learning how to publish a book and stuff. If you're interested in it, you'll learn it. And okay, I'm not saying that I have the same brain sponge power as a 12-year-old, but we still have the capacity very much to learn. And I think it's a good thing that we kind of recognize that. And I hope that other people, maybe listening to this who are in a position to have that perception about a person who is getting to a certain age and they go, no, that's actually this is like a really good time to this is a really good age to hire people because we are very committed and not
We have
but
something to
also have that
give.
experience, have that history, right? And the confidence.
That's right. And we have something to give, right? And I can't remember when we had the conversation, but I threw out the term modern elder
Yeah.
in
Well,
the business space.
yeah.
That's not my term. Okay. But I did, remember whose term that is. His name is Chip Conley. And Chip Conley has this background that he created basically boutique hotels back in the day out on the West Coast, I think San Francisco area. But anyways, he, got rid of all of his companies and yada, yada, yada. That's when the tech boom started. And then he gets this call from, um, not VRBO, but the other one,
Airbnb.
Airbnb. He gets the call from this 20 something CEO at, that organization. And this young gentleman said, hey, we need you to come in and teach us how to be a hospitality organization, because it's not about the technology. The technology is the enabler. The reality is that they're in hospitality.
Yeah.
And, he's written some books, and I know that I follow him on LinkedIn. He's always got some great posts. He's created these modern elder academies. I think one's Santa Fe, New Mexico. The other one is like Baja Peninsula. Just to, to kind of, he brings in speakers and, people, et
Yeah.
cetera, et cetera. But in reading his book, really what he is saying is that, not everyone, but there are people that, are of an age that other folks and, organizations might think that they're done learning and they have nothing left to offer. So therefore, they're going to minimize them in the organization.
Yeah.
And he said that's not true, and don't let it happen to yourself because you have something to give and provide. And
Yeah.
yeah, I think that's pretty big. I mean, over time, I think we've seen in our lives and our parents' lives that you get to a certain age, sometimes you get fired,
Yeah.
and now you can't do that anymore.
Yeah.
It's some sort of ageism type thing, but
But I felt a little bit of that. There was nothing overt that could ever, take to HR, but it just I saw it before when I first became a manager and I was managing people that were getting into their middle ages, right? And I would hear how they were referred to, especially women, because like I said, I think it happens to women earlier, and women unfortunately just get under a little bit more scrutiny sometimes. But I would hear business like managers and upper managers talking about a few people, and I just thought, there's this, because I think there is this concept, and we were those people, right? The go-getters. You respond to everything quickly, you'll do anything, you'll learn anything, and you'll learn it well. I can always go to bed. I'm the getter of shit done. We've talked about the getter of shit done. And there's a perception that once you get older, you're no longer that, as I heard it called the A player, because you're not working 70 hours. But the truth is that, I mean, I don't think that the younger generation coming up now is going to be a 70-hour a week as a rule, like the boomers and the Gen
it's
Xers were. So I think which is a good thing. That's all going to change. But um, I don't know. I think if there are people out there of any age, if there's any message to this, the message of our conversation today is you will gain a wealth of experience in whatever you do if you just put your heart into it, and don't worry about moving from job or career or interest to interest. That's a normal part of growing up and evolving and getting older. God knows we have gone in many different directions, um and you'll learn something from everything, because I think we've established, right? You learned a lot from carpentry. You learned stuff from detailing. We learned stuff from our early career that shaped us into what we are today. So I think it's all good, and it's fun to talk about. Fun to talk about that early stuff. Even though part of me wishes
absolutely.
had become an archaeologist, Mike. If I could be, I don't know, 40, 50 years later after the thought, well, 40 years later after thinking, oh, I don't want to be sitting out in the sun. I don't know. On a day like
Seems kind
today,
of fun now, isn't it?
I think I could sit out in the sun too, but
I'm sure it's not easy work by any means whatsoever, but
yeah,
of
no,
course
no, no.
we always think doing something different at a particularly bad day or whatever is always a great idea.
And I know it's a stereotype. So archaeologists out there, I know that your careers are vast and broad, but I do envy a lot of it. I love that sort of forensic aspect to things, and when try to figure out something. But anyway, it's been a great conversation again, Mike. So I'm looking forward to the next one. We'll have whatever you want to talk about, we'll talk about, and bring some value to the folks out there. But I appreciate your coming on and spending more time again in a very open and honest manner and transparency. I love it.
Well, thank you, Beth. I appreciate you inviting me once again, and yeah, I agree. The conversation's been fantastic. I always enjoy
You
pulling things out, like remembering the whole bucket incident
Yeah.
or the
Yeah, I'm sorry I helped you dredge that memory up. That might have been something that better left buried. But I'm telling you, ask the next repair person that you have or that you encounter, ask them what their craziest thing is, and it's a great kind of conversation opener, and you'll I don't know, maybe hear stories about buckets of shit that you don't want to hear, but at least you've engaged in some conversation. All right. Well, thank you everybody for listening today. Reach out. We're both on LinkedIn. I'm on Instagram. Like, where else can people get in touch with you? I think I've sort of just sort of thrown you out there, but what's the best way if somebody wants to say, "Hey, Mike, I'm curious about your past." Is there a place people can reach out to you?
I'd say LinkedIn is
Yeah.
probably the best place right now. I am working on being more accessible, if you will. But
You're
right
always
now,
responsive to me, so
LinkedIn's probably the best place, um,
awesome. Mike
without a
Goggin, no
doubt,
S. There's no S on
no
the end
S.
of Goggin, just singular Goggin. For everybody else out there, just don't forget, whatever your career, whatever your evolution, you are a fucking badass. Don't let anybody tell you otherwise. Take it easy. Hey everybody, thank you for stopping by Cafe Grit, where the moxie is fresh, the passion cold brewed, and everything is served with a heaping side of mojo. For more Cafe Grit episodes, please check out bethannecampbell.com/Cafe Grit. If you enjoyed this episode, please consider giving it a rating or review on YouTube, Buzzsprout, or your favorite streaming platform. I'll be forever grateful, and in return, I'll wish upon you copious amounts of bacon, your favorite hot beverage, and of course, pie. I'd love to connect and hear about your grit experiences as well. Please go to bethannecampbell.com for links to all my social media. Cafe Grit is a product of Beth Anne Campbell, LLC, all rights reserved. Thanks again, and remember, you are a badass. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise. Take it easy.